Welcome to Behind the Mic with Audiophile Magazine. I'm Joe Reed. Contributor Stephen Cummings is with me for the week. Hello, Stephen. How are you?
Hi, Joe. Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm actually pretty well, thank you. Pretty well, all things considered. So tell me about the week you have mapped out for us.
So I thought I'd have a little fun because lately I've had more than a few audiobooks that feature music in some way. It can be thematic, it can be direct. So I thought I could just bring these together. So this week I'd like to call this the mixtape week. We're going to talk about mixtapes in various forms, if that makes sense.
It does indeed. And where do we begin?
We're going to start with a book, an audiobook, and it's called Only Stars Know the Meaning of Space, subtitled A Literary Mixtape. This is written by
Okay.
Rémy Ngamije, and it's read by Janina Edwards, Aaron Goodson, Dennis Kleinman, and Anthony Osiemi.
Now, Janina Edwards won an audio award, was one of the audio award winners for the final revival of Opal and Nev. She's a great narrator.
And that's another book that we could have even put in here. We only
Yeah,
have so many
actually, we
days
could have.
this week.
And actually, Anthony Osiemi has not narrated many books, but the books he narrates are really quite extraordinary. He did Okorafor's Death of the Author.
Absolutely. And he is the lead voice. For lack of a better way of describing it, he takes the A sides, and I'm going to talk a bit about that in just a second. He's the voice you probably hear the most throughout this collection of stories.
Okay.
And so I can get into it if you'd like.
Yeah, sure, set it up.
These are all stories mostly set in contemporary Southern Africa. Now, this is the first audiobook where I have gone there in that space and time. I was very excited. So half the stories focus on a writer. He is nicknamed Rambo by his friends. He's a young man in his 20s. He's published and he considers himself a writer. However, he spends most of his 20s focusing on just living life rather than writing. His experiences with women, working, and family are the subject of all of these A sides. And the narrators all announce this. So as you listen to it, they'll announce this is the A side, this is the B side. The other stories in this audiobook, they don't necessarily relate directly to the story of the A sides, but they can. They sometimes do. But the themes are there, and the audiobook breaks up into A sides and B sides. So it's like a vinyl album or a cassette tape, and this is a theme throughout this week.
That's really interesting. And so the A side is basically short stories that are interconnected in some way, and the B side are short stories that may or may not connect.
That's right. They keep us basically in the space of Western Africa, but they aren't necessarily about the same characters. However, there could be connectivity in that. But by the time you finish this audiobook, you really feel like you've been in this place with these people in these different spaces in this area. So Anthony Osiemi performs these A-sides, and he's the voice of the writer, like I said. He's got a lot of swagger and a touch of vulnerability there. He struggles with women, particularly the one woman he can't seem to get over. That's his story. Now, Aaron Goodson comes up. He provides what I think of as the bulk of the B-side performances. They're not directly related to the story, like I said, but I also said thematically, you feel the connection. In one passage, for example, he performs a really just a heartbreaking tale of a group of homeless people looking out for each other,
Mm.
and it's just moving. It doesn't relate to the A-sides in the story, but you feel this life being lived. Dennis Kleinman, he narrates one harrowing story about the Namibian War of Independence. And that's something that I think listeners, you start to really get a sense is a sort of specter that hangs over the history of this area, is this War of Independence. And so there's one passage devoted to that. And then Janina Edwards, as you noted, soul woman's voice here. And she really provides that just a necessary counterweight to these male performances that we hear.
So it's not entirely male dominated.
No, no. In fact, like I said, when Janina comes in, I think she does 4 or 5 of the B-sides, and you really feel that you really feel how that sort of comes together. When you think of a really good mixtape, and I don't know if
Mhm.
you've ever made one of those
Oh,
yourself.
of
I've made
course.
them
Yeah.
more than a few of my it's how I met people growing up, right? To make a really good one, it has to connect even if the songs are very different. So this is a literary version of that. So the structure follows that style. Music isn't directly related in the stories themselves, although they are referenced as pop culture, but they come together. And I think the themes you hear here are about growth, survival, all the things that a really good mixtape can do.
Well, why don't we hear a little? Who are we gonna hear from in the excerpt?
So we're going to actually hear from Janina Edwards.
Oh, lovely.
She is going to provide one of those B-side stories, and I'll just let her selection play. Her voice is really invoking that space and time of Western Africa. Like I said, very different perspective than those male dominant A-side stories.
Okay, this is Only the Stars Know the Meaning of Space, a literary mixtape. It's by Rémy Ngamije. It's read by a multicast, but we'll be hearing from Janina Edwards.
B-side, Annus Horribilis. At the end of what they called the terrible year, the Annus Horribilis, after the fizz and tingle of the first kiss, more like cheap vodka on his breath and something lemony with gin on hers, but we allow lovers greater latitude when it comes to memory. On a chilly, spring-shy September night that teased goose flesh onto arms, when the meteorologists had predicted biblical deluges and fields were furrowed in agricultural anticipation, at the dusty, asthma-unfriendly country fair, which didn't look like anything from the movies, because this wasn't the movies. This was real-life Namibia, a place no films were made of, a city no poets serenaded with verse, a place of small, unrecorded tragedies.
She has such a warm voice, I think, and is such a deeply thoughtful narrator. She's kind of master of the understatement,
Mhm.
but she knows how to convey emotion.
She does, and it's so called for here because, like I said, the sort of dominant male performances here, which again are exceptional, don't get me wrong, but they really speak to that
Yeah.
experience. And when her voice comes in, even if we're not talking about the same people, you really kind of feel this sort of filling out of this environment, this soundscape. So I was thrilled to hear her voice.
Okay, that is Only the Stars Know the Meaning of Space by Rémy Ngamije. And it's read by Janina Edwards, Aaron Goodson, Dennis Kleinman, and by Anthony Osayemi. Well, that is a great start to your mixtape week, literally.
I know, I'm excited about it. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. I'll talk to you tomorrow, Stephen. Support for Behind the Mic comes from Zondervan, publisher of Joy Bomb, written and narrated by Grammy Award nominee and pastor Torrin Wells. Available everywhere you listen to audiobooks. If you like Behind the Mic, leave us a rating and don't forget to follow us on the platform of your choice. I am Joe Reed. I'll talk to you tomorrow.